Thank you. Good morning. I liked last, two words from Manoj, Gati or Shakti, right? But at what cost? I think exactly a month back, 9th September, was celebrated as World EV Day. I think special to you guys. And now, fast forward 1 month, we are talking about green mobility uh, in India, legacy meets innovation. So a brief about me, and I'll also request panelists to share brief about them. I run a fund and tech focused. I do have a small presence. I've invested in a battery swap company enabling two-wheeler and three-wheeler have continuity meeting their last mile objective. Akshay, if you can quickly give your background and then
Sure.
I'll request NS also.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I'm Akshay Singhal. I'm the founder and CEO of Log9. We are a company which starts right at the level of making lithium-ion cells in India, going to a battery pack level, and then providing those battery solutions for electric vehicle applications and stationary energy storage applications. So stitching together that battery tech requirement in the country, where we have established India's first cell manufacturing facility this April in Bangalore, and we are continuing to ramp up our capacity and capabilities on that side. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Akshay. NS.
Good morning, pleasure to be here. I'm a legacy in every way, both personally and I think always worked for legacy companies. I work on the city of Ashok Leyland. I think we are probably in the most interesting of all times, right? In terms of technology change, what we're going through, and I think it's for me a pleasure to be here talking to you guys. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, NS. Just, before we, head on the conversation, interesting conversation with two gentlemen, how many in this room own any EV vehicle? Must be around 10, right? Anyway, I'm sure, Akshay is going to energize the room and help in green mobility while lot is being done. I think green mobility or especially EV, what we can talk, I'm not going to touch base on hydrogen or other fuel. It's not, new, actually has been there for centuries. US has adopted, but, ICE, what we also called internal combustion engine, being cost effective, more power, cheaper, I think never allowed, EVs to come. But look at what has happened in last decade. I was just going through some data, 2013, India had around 50,000 registration. You can please correct me if I'm wrong. Fast forward, I think couple of months back, India have reached almost 230,000 registration of EV vehicle. It's growing. It is said that India is now around 4% market in terms of EV vehicles, and it is said that once it crosses 4, it grows very fast. It is anticipated between now and 2030, this segment is growing, is expected to grow at a percentage of almost 50% month on month. It's actually quite a big number and would be interesting to learn from both these gentlemen. While one have a legacy, a lot of wisdom, have helped moving goods and people across country, and then we have Akshay who is speaking about new age technology for driving. So the role of legacy automaker evolving in the era of green mobility, and how are startup like Log9 influencing this change? What are the
No, I think if you just to give you context, as a legacy player, it's probably the most challenging time, right? We are what I call the messy middle. We were happy up till 2020s with the dealing with diesel engines primarily. Then came the whole onslaught of technology, both driven by need to be green, could be energy independence, multiple factors. So now, right now, we are not just EVs for us. We are what we call messy middle because we deal with multiple fuels, varying levels of green sustainability and quality. I have all the way from CNG, bio CNG, LNG in one sense to EVs in some segments. You also have other fuels like methanol, ethanol talking about. So for us, the real challenge is how do we navigate this space? If you're a fresh startup, you don't have legacy to deal with, whereas we have to still deal with what is diesel, what is left of it, but still, I think, still continue to invest in EVs. The challenge for us is multiple fronts, not just technology from a product side, but also the ecosystem perspective, right? Unlike diesel vehicles, where we know that once you have a diesel vehicle, you have petrol bunks and so on, but in the ecosystem is a big challenge for us. And I think personally for us, legacy companies are not used to working with startups, right? They work with large tier one suppliers. They're happy going to them, getting a full system up. I think some of the challenges we also face is how do we embrace and concept of open innovation? How do you embrace co-development with smaller companies? How do you put together multiple technologies to make it more comprehensive? I think these are interesting times, and hopefully such dialogues will also help us get better at such things. Yeah.
Akshay?
Yeah, so from a startup's perspective, right, if you look at the whole EV and the battery segment, right, in that sense that this is a sector which nobody has done and seen in the past, right? So what it requires is a very fundamental approach to building solutions, and especially in the Indian context, because even technologies and the way they've been built across the world are not directly replicable over here in the Indian context. So when you're trying to create a solution for a two-wheeler or a three-wheeler or a four-wheeler, which is typical in India, right? It's very different from what you have seen already in US, Europe, China, or these markets. So it requires, as I said, it requires a very fundamental approach, and that's where I think startups become very, very relevant, because we don't, as he mentioned, right? We don't have the legacy challenge. We don't have a challenge of managing something which already exists, but rather we can say that, okay, we can take a completely disruptive approach and say that this is what fundamentally makes sense. This is what we should build out. So I think that's where startups become very, very important in the whole EV sector, because it's a new sunrise sector, and everything has to be developed from ground up.
And just to build upon that, I think it's a perfect opportunity. Unlike legacy technologies where we depended on a lot of technology from the West, especially in technology, there's a fundamental opportunity for us to change things, right? I mean, that's I think the key, and that's where I think the startups play a key role, being able to explore multiple options and come up with what is right for India, and also not just for India, but also opportunities outside India. I think to me it is very, very fascinating on what can be done.
It's quite interesting, like while we are talking about old systems, you have built infrastructure, right? Building a product is one, but delivering it to, right audience is also important, and India is a large country. I had an opportunity to be associated with a greenfield battery project, which is a lead acid battery normally used at homes, for your inverter and converter, and also solar plant. But it's not difficult, because you can charge it. The product is designed in a way that it can have a slow charge and slow discharge. But in today's challenging time, the technology is changing, and everybody want 2 minutes Maggie, right? My car should be charged and I should be able to deliver. So Akshay, what's your view about it? I'm sure we'll also have NS view on that, but the battery technology is very complex, right? While you need to build a long lasting charging, at the same time it also need to quickly charge, and it's basically live bomb if it is not handled properly, right? So how do you
So I'll
manage?
come to the whole sort of say requirement for charging and faster charging and rapid charging and all of that. But I think one of the things that we keep on forgetting in the whole context of EVs and batteries is that why did we start doing it in the first place, right? And that's something which has been lost, I think, 10 years ago, saying that we started doing EVs and we looked at this transition because we want to create a positive climate impact, and that track kind of gets lost in the whole approach of the way we are building applications and solutions, because I don't know why there's a constant push to make consumers adopt to EVs more and more. The day-to-day home consumers, a home user doesn't really even create an impact from a green perspective when it drives or switches to an EV. So when you ask the question that how many of people in the audience really drive in electric vehicle, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that our whole logistics is shifted to EV first, because that's where the utilization is high enough to really justify a clean impact from using an electric vehicle. Electric vehicle, to start with, is actually more polluting in the manufacturing process, because nobody counts that, right? We only count the tailpipe emissions. So once we start to only drive it and drive it enough on the road, that's when the real impact comes out. And when you talk about commercial electric mobility, it is very, very important to have quick turnaround times, because these people have to be more on the road rather than at the charging station. So from that perspective, going from slow charging to fast charging to rapid charging is something which becomes very, very important. And if you look at and if you do a comparison, right, if you look at commercial mobility versus personal use case mobility, the penetration levels are significantly higher. A three-wheeler segment, for example, which is predominantly commercial, today sees more than 40% penetration rate as compared to the average 4%. So it's 10 times of where we are as an entire market. So from that perspective, building for commercial use cases requires the ability to provide performance, provide faster and faster charging. And once we make more and better and better batteries, both from a cost perspective as well as from an environmental perspective, that's when the case for your personal use case mobility will build, and there will be a natural sense of transitioning to an EV. So once you, so it works both ways, both from a cost perspective as well as from an infra perspective. So once you scale infra for a commercial application, right, and commercial application has more predictable routes and paths in which the vehicle is used, and once that scales, anybody can use it. So we should have a focus on pushing more and more EVs in the commercial segment, because that helps you grow infra as well on a step by step basis, and then anybody can adopt an EV and use
So,
that infra.
Akshay, picking from your point on, commercial basis, especially infrastructure, and NS would love to hear your views on what has been, being, done by Ashok Leyland or your peers, helping grow infrastructure or adoption of, vehicle, because producing is not difficult, but if you are not able to run it with proper charge, then it's, big pain, right? So what's your view around it? And
Just to
what the
set,
challenges, you face in that?
just to set the context, I think absolutely right. If you want to really make an impact in terms of decarbonization, you have to go after the logistics sector, not just small three-wheelers, but larger commercial vehicles. Yeah, any data shows that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, a significant amount of transportation comes, and that from commercial vehicles. That said, it's also the most complex because I mean, a lot of things that lend itself in the two-wheeler, three-wheeler like swap are a little bit more challenging. I'm not saying not can't be done, more challenging. Yeah, and also it becomes a lot more, unlike a personal vehicle preference, it is a lot more TCO driven. So you have to make commercial sense to the operator to do that. Yeah. So there then becomes challenge of what is the right application technology matching. In some applications you could do swap possibly, some could be flash charging, fast charging, some could be regular. So all depends on the application. I think that's where we are at a place where we're exploring multiple options. From our Ashok Leyland perspective, we've been open about it. We are not saying we will do one technology. For example, we were the first to start a swap battery in buses in Ahmedabad along with a partner. We have tried flash charging along with one more partner for city buses. So for us, we believe it is an evolving in terms of technology of how batteries itself could come, how the charging could come. That's because there's no one single technology, one single way of doing it. Unlike in Europe where you have large OEMs coming and saying, I will put fast 1 megawatt chargers on highways, or there's a mandate now to government saying that every X kilometers you need to have a charger to enable this. In India, it is not like, it's not a regulation driven. It's more of TCO driven. So therefore, it is right now, I would say like the Wild West, free for all. Every charging provider is putting up wherever he can find real estate. And I think that will stabilize over time. And hopefully, with a lot more interest shown by a lot of the larger fleet operators to at least go green. Maybe it is driven at this point by ESG goals. But what I see is over time, you'll start seeing major corridors, about 9 corridors in India, which transport 60% of the freight. You'll start seeing at least some impetus towards higher power chargers coming in. That will be the starting point. Over that, you'll start seeing maybe specific operators, OEMs, or even companies saying, I want to do A to B transport, can you sort of help me with both? I think it's a combination. Over the next few years, we'll start evolving, and hopefully we'll also start looking at more open protocols where some of these charging guys can talk to each other. So from operator perspective, you don't have to have multiple ways of talking to each other. So I think things have to evolve. I think it will evolve hopefully, and I think the role of as an OEM is to enable this to evolve.
No, I agree on that. I think today's norm of having battery packs and you cannot remove it probably has to go if we really want to have sustainable, way of going forward. I recently had opportunity to give views to leading publication around 9th September World EV Day, and the two major questions which came, and I would love to hear, your views, especially you from manufacturing side and you from battery side. I think the two biggest challenge, a third of course you spoke about infrastructure, I think as a country will, come to terms as we grow. But the two biggest challenge what I feel in this segment is, one is the cost. Right, I don't think a vehicle is a costlier, but certainly, making it compatible, the cost is a big factor. If I have to shell out more and if I have a challenges in charging, I would rather continue to using ICE, combustible engine led vehicles. And secondly, how do you, make it sustainable, right, from battery perspective? Any views from?
No, I think you're right. As if you look at typical, I may be using some jargon from vehicle, but if you look at 12-ton vehicle, 12-ton is like a GVW carrying weight. It's a typical vehicle you see on the roads in the cities, right? Such a vehicle will need about 200 kilowatt hour battery pack, yeah? Ideally, without swapping. Just then you look at the cost. Even if you look at $150 per kilowatt hour, you're adding $30,000, which is much more than the vehicle cost. So how does a customer make sense of it? I mean, you can say on a spreadsheet, you can say over 10 years it is TCO positive, but nobody is keeping the vehicle for 10 years. So I think what's also going to happen is possibly more innovative models to say why shouldn't it not just technology from a battery swapping, flash charging, but also maybe from things like battery as a service. Disassociate the cost of battery from the vehicle. Somebody else sort of bears the cost. It's not a swapping model, but it's more of somebody else bears the cost of the battery and sort of works with that. So I think multiple models are evolving, nothing in large scale yet. So I do believe as people see opportunity, there will models that will evolve that will start making more and more sense. It will start with small application, but over time I think it will evolve to where.
I'm sure some of the starters have made note of this point. It's a good opportunity. If segment is expected to grow 59%, you need to have a solution around it. Akshay, your views before I take up one last question.
When you talk about TCO of electric vehicle, right, it is completely dependent on utilization. Yes. More and more you use it, it is going to be cheaper, and that's the reason there is some parity which is already set in as far as two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and small four-wheelers are concerned for last mile applications. But the consumer segment still struggles with the TCO parity issue. And definitely the larger vehicles, because of the sheer size of the battery required, there's a challenge in parity. And as he rightly mentioned, right, when you talk about a bus or a truck application, a normal bus, for example, a 12-meter bus would cost you 80 lakhs or thereabouts, whereas the cost of an EV bus of similar type would be double that price. And therefore, it requires some innovative financing solutions at the same time while we improve technology on that side. One of the key challenges that we see in the ecosystem, especially in India, is that we are not a very deep capital market when it comes to debt and leasing and financing in that sense. And that is where EVs are facing a huge struggle in the Indian context. I'll give you another example. If you look at today EV financing in the last mile segment, right, the financing IRRs are more like 18%, 15 to 18%, whereas you can get a car loan at 9 to 10%. Right, so we are penalizing EVs just because they are a new concept and it is being given out to somebody who doesn't have a very great credit score for last mile application, right? So these are challenges which need to be solved while the technology is being solved at the same time.
So one more idea has been shared by Akshay. I'm sure somebody is noting. One last question before we open up, for audience to ask. As a startup, I'm sure you. One thing, right? As a grown-up company, established player, and you start up, no background, trying to make your own presence. I don't think you can go silo. Probably there's a room to, have crisscross and collaboration. As a startup, what are your expectations from players like them? And, reverse question to you, NS, as an established player, when you see, you have certain challenges at your end, whereas the startup which is growing quite fast can add a lot of value to you and your product. What would you like to do, so there is some collaboration between two segments?
So,
would like to say you?
yes, at least from my side, I think the expectations from larger companies, particularly in the EV sector, from our perspective would be to, as he actually alluded to initially, is that there has to be models wherein we can work even at a smaller scale, right? And that is something, it's not really about having that consistency or that track record of 5 years or 10 years of consistently being manufacturing a product or something like that, but at least having that option of working with larger companies, even when we are just piloting or at a prototype stage and then going to a large scale manufacturing stage. So I think that is important, and the ecosystem all over that we have seen in the EV segment has opened up to this, right? So like for example, we have while we have not worked with Ashok Leyland particularly, but we have worked with Mahindra, for example. We have worked with Hero, for example. We have worked with TVS, for example. Amar Raja is an investor in Log9. So that that warmth is beginning to come in, and I think it's a realization also that even the perspective that there are so many different options and technologies and solutions available. Everything cannot be done in house, right? So you need these small nodes which can bring in those solutions and bring it towards a larger conglomerate in that sense.
Interesting. NS, some final
No, I
words?
think from our side, I think I would say the willingness is there to work with. I mean, there is no doubt about it. There's also in some cases willingness to invest. Beyond that, there's a struggle. What do we do? We invest, we get technology, but how do I integrate that into the larger picture? Take an example, in the battery pack itself, there are people doing new collector designs and dynamic balancing of cells. But how do OEM is not used to sort of taking these technologies and sort of integrating it together into holistic. And this technology also is new. So I think the challenge is mindset challenge, if you ask me, and how do we actually work with multiple startups and make sure at some point these are actually useful for the OEM. Right now what I see is a bunch of investments happening, bunch of POCs happening, some technology getting in. Is it holistic enough? Not yet, not yet. I think the comfort factor is still not there. I'm not saying it's because of OEMs or startups. It's just that how it is. You're just not used to working with each other. I think it'll happen more out of necessity than anything else, because OEMs can't really afford to invest in multiple such deep technologies. That is a matter of time, in my view.
Very true. So glad to know, while Akshay is looking for some support and you are willing to provide support. With this, I would end my questions. We have some couple of minutes. If any queries from audience, I'm sure they would love to answer. We have one here.
Hello, hope I'm audible. So my first question is with regards to Ashok Leyland's recent acquisition on OHM mobility, that specifically on e-mobility as a service. I wanted to understand what was the rationale for selecting that specific segment. How do you think is going to grow specifically on e-mass, if there is anything on that, any rationale on that? The second thing is, knowing that you got an investment from Amar Raja Batteries, Petronas Ventures in around 40 million, if my election is right. So how are you working with Amar Raja Batteries, and like what do you think? I think that was the last question. I just echo that thought. Specifically, how do you think it is to work with such an entity? Because as a startup, you got acquired. You got a good big stake with as a specific entity like Amar Raja Batteries. So how does it feel, and what do you think other entities can look up to? So these were the two quick questions.
No, I think OM is a subsidiary of ours, which provides mobility as a service, and primarily came from two fundamental reasons. One is, if you look at the bus market in India, it is all 100% mobility as a service. Yeah, you get paid per kilometer. So one is to enable us to enter the market, you need to have something where you can provide the service. And it made sense to have a separate company, because you don't want to sort of put all that risk on your balance sheet as Ashok Leyland. So I think that is why you look at most companies have done this, mobility as a service, especially in India. So that's one of buses. Second, as the market evolves even to trucks, we see potential that customers will start looking at mobility as a service model. Even large fleet operators are saying, rather than buying a truck, they'll start talking about, why don't you lease me the truck, in a sense, pay per kilometer. So we see opportunity there, and that's the reason for OM, which is a mobility as a service provider.
Akshay, your thoughts?
Yeah, so basically working with companies like Amar Raja, for example, or any strategic investor for a startup, I think one of the key things is alignment of thought, and then managing expectations from agility as well as the way they want to drive it and the way we want to drive it, right? So that always will be the case, right? Because there is a style of working on the strategic investor side, there is a style of working at the startup end, and how do you really bridge that gap? So it's all come down to what kind of relationships are you able to manage, and how clearly are you doing the communication with respect to your expectations, and how clearly you're understanding their expectation and vision in making the investment in the first place. And that cuts for both Maharaja as well and Petronas also, because both of them are strategic investors with Log9. So I think managing that relationship is something which is key, because there will always be difference of opinions, there will always be difference of expectations. So you have to find some middle ground on that side.
Thanks, Akshay. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, hi. This is Sunil from Toshiba. First, thanks to Mr. Joshi to open up the podium for question. This question is from battery as a service kind of model. Couple of years back, the government has, shared the thoughts of defining some kind of or controlling the market through a policy, right? The stock policy. But not much evolution is seen. So, what could be holding it back, and what could be some of the enablers? Is it that the players are holding onto their own technology, not leaning towards standardization or interoperability, or there are other challenges, and how those could be solved for a better EV adoption?
I'm sure they will share their views, but what I understand, it's work in progress. I think last draft has come in. I know there are some challenges, but till time those are ironed out, it's not easy because space is evolving. While it's growing quite rapidly, but the base is so small, you will see the impact. But I think to solve the problems, if you ask me why I don't have a EV, because I see a problem, maintaining it. I see a problem charging. If I can't charge, I can't use it. So I don't need toys or a junks, sitting outside my house. I think the day it is solved, and some of the, solution to this is, having policy which allows, this kind of situation, right? Your view, sir? At the end of the day, you guys
I
are
think
driving.
there's a fundamental challenge which is to do about standardization, right? Standardization takes away differentiation, standardization takes away competitive advantage. And that's where it becomes very, very tricky to bring in 20 players, or actually we have 400 players who make EVs today in the Indian market. So how do you bring everybody together and say that, okay, this is the common battery type which I can swap against my vehicle? So that is where it becomes really, really challenging. But I also like to bring out one fact, which is that battery as service is not limited to battery swapping. Even a fixed battery solution can be offered as a service model, and I think those are lower hanging fruits, and from a policy perspective, it can be far easier to solve for it, and then eventually we can look at swapping as well.
It's a complex science, right? Battery management system. So if you ask me, battery in general are all same. It may depend what composition you're using, making those cells. That probably could be standardized. What matters is BMS and its interaction with the vehicle, software. I think if there is some protocol around it with some room to play, I think we can have. Otherwise, you need to have some, solution where some interoperability is allowed, right? So I think still work in progress if you ask me. Since I have an investment, I know how it's progressing. We are still waiting for that to happen. NS, any views?
No, I think
Otherwise, we can.
I'll
Saying time's up.
let the free market win. I think typically in these cases, the company that builds scale sometimes wins. Like you see in Tesla's chargers, we're taking over the US market. So I think things like that. So I think if somebody builds enough scale in swap and they're going to become a standard by default. So I think you can't really force mandate a standard. I think it's going to be challenging with multiple, with lots of possible differentiation on that. Yeah.
Akshay and NS, thanks for making this
Pleasure.
panel and sharing your thoughts. I'm sure we will see more hands up next year about how many people own the vehicle. Thank you very much.
Thank you.